Hi, my name is Jazmin Pirozek. Uh, I am, well, Manganunque in addition to Cuz, Wigizina Dudem. They call me the Wolf Star Woman. I'm from Eagle Clan. I was born and raised on Lake of the Woods, and I currently live on Lake of the Woods, where I am building my healing center for integrative learning and education and healing. And Andrew, you want to give us a brief introduction?
Sure. Bonjour, Nindoe Morganidug, Makomasen de Go, Michigan Odem, Shkanzibi and Dunchbon, and Schnabe Nini and Dao, Ojibige Nini and Dao, Made Nini and Dao. Nui Shaganashi, I'll speak English. So thank you everyone for joining us for this conversation on decolonization. I look forward to sharing a little bit. My English name is Andrew Judge, and I am a professor of Anishinaabe Studies at Algoma University in Shingwak, Kinamag in present-day Sault Ste. Marie, or Bawati, or the place of the rapids. Miigwech. Thanks.
Miigwech, Andrew. Thank you so much. So when Andrew and I were preparing for the webinar, there's a lot that we can cover through the whole country when it comes to the idea of decolonization. And I want to talk about decolonization as not that we're going to take away culture or what it is we have established. It's definitely of the mind. So that's why I titled it Decolonizing the Mind. So because with psychedelics, we inherently do that anyway, is we clear a lot of debris away, and then we invite really great things into our hearts. So I wanted to talk with everyone and talk with Andrew. So it's gonna be more conversational style between Andrew and I, and our conversations can go on and on and on, which they do, right, Andrew? But I think the educational aspects is just so that you can understand an Indigenous person's place in Canada, what it means. Like, we are inherently political people just because of the nature of things like the Indian Act and as such. And at any time, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the question and answer area, and then we'll do our best to answer them as we go. But maybe Andrew, you can give us the kind of introduction where
Sure.
I wanted to talk a little bit about migration, but I want to hear your introduction there.
Sure. Thanks, Yasmin. So thank you all, just for joining us and for taking the time to want to learn a little bit more about decolonization. My work is really not decolonial. It's more a practice of our way of life as an Anishinaabe. So I'm an Anishinaabe. And of course, there are many Indigenous peoples throughout Canada, throughout the Americas, hundreds of languages. The language of my ancestors is the Algic language, or the Algonquian language, of which there are anywhere between 35 and probably maybe 100 dialects of just that one language. So the one thing I really like to start off when I talk about this topic with is the idea that is in the colonial mind. And I know that idea is there because I had it for a while. I didn't grow up, with a set of teachings because, only 50, 60 years ago, to even utter my language, to practice our ceremony was a crime. So there's this image of the primitive Indian, and it's one where often we're depicted as wearing, a loincloth or some kind of like diaper. We have almost no clothes on other than that. And often we're in a stance. We have a certain stance, something like this. And there's usually a weapon in our hands. And you'll see images of the mastodon or like the saber-toothed tiger or something crazy. How many people have seen that image before? And I can't see your reaction, but I'm just going to put that out there. How many people have seen that before? Probably all of you. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Okay. So when Europeans arrived to this continent, they were lost. And it was us as the indigenous peoples down further south, but who found them and rescued them. And there's this idea of the hero savior, the white hero savior. That's also a lie. Okay, because between 1500 and 1600, just that 100-year time frame, and that's about 5 generations. But between that time frame, between 60 and 70 million indigenous peoples died. Okay, they were wiped out. This was the greatest genocide in human history. The diseases that were spread throughout the lands deliberately, and we know that they were spread deliberately because later there was very clear records of the deliberate spread of diseases through various means. My one teacher talks about how here where I live, they would give us blankets. And before, there was a rock beside the blankets that they were giving to our peoples as gifts before the winter. And they would take those blankets and they would smash them on the rock right before the blanket. And they would take these blankets back and they would think, oh, why are they doing that? And there would be glass in it. Well, that glass jar had one of 11 different airborne diseases in it. And so they ensured that they wouldn't catch it themselves. So they stored it away in these glass jars. Now, the impact of that is cataclysmic. It is an impact felt on a global scale from the 1600s to the 1800s, in which the entire Earth experienced a climate change, and that was a mini ice age. There have been recent studies on this event. In a historical timeline, 100 years is a very, very short timeline. But prior to that, we had been for hundreds and hundreds of generations designing our landscape and evolving with the animals, the plants, choosing very strategically and selectively exactly where it is we would build our civilizations. And here in the Americas, there were the largest cities in the world prior to colonization, some of the richest cities, perhaps aside from China and Japan, in the world, the most advanced cities in the world. And there's too many to talk about, but Tenochtitlan, Teotihuacan, and more closer to where I live, Cahokia, is just a few examples of some of the largest cities. And so most indigenous peoples prior to colonization lived in cities. We were not marauding around in the forest, searching for the next mastodon to wipe out. We were not coming out of caves, and we had advanced writing systems. We had an enormous ethnobotanical knowledge. And before I pass you back to you, Jazmin, I just want to add that every time that an indigenous language disappears, it's not just a people who vanish forever. It is the hundreds of generations that evolved with the earth, designing the earth in a way that would ensure future generations could thrive. And all the ethnobotanical knowledge of that place that vanishes along with it. So if you're wondering why we are in our current crisis of global warming, which is being experienced all around the world, it is estimated that if we reach just 2 degrees of warming, and I think we're at 1.4 right now and rising quickly, there will be anywhere between 60 to 100 or 150 million climate refugees annually. Okay, and there's already millions of climate refugees currently. So that's sort of my place in this, is that I teach, and I've been teaching at the post-secondary level for the past decade about our knowledge, not the story as told by the colonizer that has created this image in your mind of this, primitive Indian. It's so awash with lies that amongst the people who I've learned from, it is sort of a joke. We kind of laugh at how there are still people who believe this about us. Sometimes we just let them believe that, because for us to achieve knowledge means you achieve action. There is no knowledge without action. And the action is the relationship to our relatives. Nindawe Malginidug, right? I am related to everything. I am related to everything. And so my teachers have taught me to listen to the land, to listen to all that is around me. And it's not always easy, because we have created this, advanced civilization. So that's sort of my introduction. Hopefully for some of you, it's not an attack, but it's just hopefully an awakening that there's something there to be learned, and there are few people left to teach it. So we have to start listening now.
Wow. Wow, Andrew. Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. The idea of, I think they call it the noble savage. Yeah, the picturesque image of, a man with a bow. And we have a lot of that in my area, in the Kenora area. There's lots of history, but the history is skewed by that noble savage idea. Such as this is Ojibwe territory where I am. My First Nation is Norway House Cree First Nation. So like we have a little bit different tradition, but I was raised on this land. So I carry the traditions here. And this is considered a ceded territory because it's treated. And there was an agreement that was made in 18, like right as soon as Canada became Canada, 1872-ish. Somebody could probably correct me on the date.
1876 or 1867, sorry.
67 for Treaty 3. Yeah, so right before Canada became Canada. What's really great about what I've done, I got my undergrad degree in anthropology and archaeology, and anthropology is inherently a racist kind of subject. And I only learned that in my last year of my anthropology degree, because I was being taught by colonized minds. Like I was being taught by a Western mind, and I wasn't being taught by Indigenous people until my last year. And I had a teacher, his name is Dennis McPherson, and he wrote this book, Indian on the Inside. It's a really excellent book. It was our textbook for class, and he went through even Western understanding all the way to Indigenous understanding, all the way to what we are of today. And then I got my master's in biology, plant biology, used phytochemical methods to determine, the different compounds in the plants, which it doesn't really matter because the spirits are the effective portion of each plant that I spending time with the plants, I got to learn a lot of that, and same with the psychedelics as well. The psychedelics really opened my heart to a lot of the healing. But what I noticed is that wild rice in my area, it's very prevalent. And when you look at the genetic record of wild rice, and usually that's an Indigenous person's, that's like the thing you think of when you think of Indigenous food. Many times in my area, Lake of the Woods. By the way, about 2 hours east of Winnipeg, so very, very close to Winnipeg. And wild rice isn't actually wild. It evolved alongside the people, the same way in which when the glaciers receded from this area and these glacial remnants, which are all the lakes that are in the area, these glacial remnant lakes, they started to grow this type of grass. And over 10,000 years, we were able to evolve alongside it. Kind of like Andrew's saying, like we didn't evolve separately from the land. We are one thing when it comes to the land. And I think that's what a lot of people see when they think of that image that Andrew was mentioning, the idea of the noble savage. And that was the words they used in anthropology. That's why I said it was inherently a racist subject, even though, many anthropologists work with Indigenous groups to try to help them with sovereignty, help them with, but really that's the perspective that's out there. But talking about anthropology, I also got to talk about the genetic history of many peoples. And genetically, we can see the mitochondrial DNA that we have a connection with the people in Peru and in the northern tip of South America, all the way through the Mississippi waterway, which was the Mississippian complex, maybe only 600 years ago. And then we can also see the traveling of tobacco as well, because tobacco is not an indigenous plant to the Canada in general, but we use it in a very sacred way. And it's one of our sacred plants that we gift to others, that we put down, that we pray, that we try to pray for the thunderstorms not to come. Andrew was teasing me earlier about it. But there's so many rich traditions that are always being overlooked because I don't want to say because, like, it's not for a lack of kindness, but this idea of the primitive, I think the word itself is what takes us away from who we really are. So when Andrew was talking about language is so important when we try to hold the teachings, because many of the teachings are housed right in the language, especially many of the plant medicine teachings. If you're going to, learn from an Indigenous person in their communities and they're speaking their language, they're going to tell you details about the plants that you never have gotten in English. Like, for example, Andrew, the word for strawberry. Could you give us a little bit of explanation on that?
Sure, yeah. So maybe I have a slide. Let me see if I can pull it up. But the word for strawberry is odemin. Odemin. And here, I'm gonna share this. Oh, I can't share my screen. So if you can, let me share my screen. So let me talk a little bit about that. Jazmin, thank you for bringing that to our attention. For us, our work in evolving with the land, and because that's what we are, we as human beings, we are the land. And so a lot of my work is about helping people to remember what it means to be a human.
Oh.
And so can everybody see this screen? Can you see this? Okay, so At the center of our work is Ode. Okay. Can you say that? I know I can't hear you, but can you try and say Ode?
Ode.
Ode. Ode. Ode. Ode. Ode. Hopefully, by me repeating it, you start to get a sense of what that word is all about. It's not just the heart, because English does very little to describe. And how it was taught to me by one of my teachers, Randy Trudeau, was that Ode actually means a pump or a muscle, something that is in constant motion. And what's really interesting about this is that from the first point of conception, that is what forms, is that place. And from there, everything starts to take shape. And for us, Ode is so important because it's what is pumping sacred water throughout the body. And we have a song, and it's like Nibe Wabo Endaya Akimesque Nibe Wabo. And I'm not gonna sing the whole song just in this moment because I just don't feel like it. But what that word means, Mide Wabo, is the sacred water that we hold up. It's the sacred water that the women have in their bodies. And they're the only ones that have that. And that sacred water is held by the women in their ceremony. It's part of like a very particular way of doing ceremony for us. And actually, you had mentioned it first. Asema, the tobacco, is first because we were lowered into a tobacco field. We pollinated it. That's part of our creation story. And so then the water is held up, it's prayed over, and then it becomes medicine. And then we drink that water to be filled with the spirit of those prayers. So Ode is not just heart. It's the sacred water throughout the body that's the same as the water of the earth. Mede Wabo, that sacred water, Endaya, we are the same. Aki Miskwi, earth, blood. The water, that sacred water that we hold up, is the same as the blood in our veins. Now imagine that is the first teaching you receive as a child. That all water is sacred. And that you are water, and that from this place, that water is transmitting through your entire body. And so there's several words for water. Bish is just the one I'm going to use at this time because it connects with what I'm about to say. But nibe is probably a more accurate word for water. But there's also with each beat of the heart an electricity, wasmuin. And so for the women in here, how many of you are just like your mother? And for the women in this room, how many of you are just like your mother but unwilling to admit it? Okay. I ask that question often, and half the room when I say, "Are you just like your mom?" and half the women put up their hands, and then they're all smiling. And then when I say, "How many of you are just like your mothers but unwilling to admit it?" Then the other half of the room puts up their hands. So it's kind of funny. But what's amazing about our journey as humans is that that's what we get to hear for the first 9 months of our development. Ode. We hear our mother's heartbeat. And for the all the people in this room, at just 4 months developed, your mother in your grandmother's womb had all the eggs that she would carry for the rest of her life. And so essentially we are a reflection of our grandmother's heartbeat. These are our teachings as Anishinaabe. These are what we teach the young ones and the old ones alike, and we tell these stories over and over. But more than just the water, Ode connects to the fire. This is your fire, your sacred fire, the place from which you get to choose how you will, you get to choose what trail you will leave on this earth. And we are taught to leave a soft trail and to ensure that the trail we leave is one that the future generations can follow to the places of harvest. And so the connection between the fire and the water is this strength, ish, bish, ish, ishkode. Strength, it's not strength like flexing in a mirror, like I'm sure a few of us are guilty of every once in a while. But it's the strength of the movement of your body that is based on a set of teachings that is passed down to from your ancestors, and for us passed down for 1,000 generations. For us, the drum, Ode Wagon, it's the one that we use to remember the place where we come from. We come from the womb of our mothers. We are born through the flood of her waters. Okay. We remember that Odeena or Odenang, the place where the people's hearts gather. Our entire civilization was ordered around nurturing the hearts of others. And how do we nurture the hearts of others? We give them clean water. We give them all those beautiful fruits and vegetables and all those beautiful harvests that are just right there, right outside, if only we take a moment to listen. And that brings us to Odemin, the word that Jazmin was talking about. This is the strawberry. And of course, right now we are heading towards the strawberry moon. So for us, our orientation as Anishinaabe, as human beings, is not to the Gregorian calendar until next tomorrow's June 17th or whatever. We're orientated to the solstices and the equinoxes. We're orientated to the moon cycles. We're orientated to the sun cycles. And we had advanced calendars that measured exactly when these important dates occurred. Okay, so that for us is truth. And truth, Ode Bwewin, okay, is not about the words you speak, it's about the actions that you take. Ode Bwewin. Bwewin is like, it's the movement of your body on this planet, okay? So anyways, that's a little bit about our teachings as Anishinaabe, but connecting us and reminding us what it means essentially to be a human being. You got me going there.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love that. That was the whole intention. And I know that the strawberry has that those teachings and that's why it's really important for us to continue to learn the language, everyone to learn the language, because there's a lot of education in knowing that, like that whole circle that you offered us is brilliant, because in many psychedelic ceremonies that we would have nowadays, we feel those connections like very deeply inside of ourselves. And what's great is that now you're saying there's a way to explain it, but there always was a way to explain it for time immemorial until and then so I want to go a little bit into migration, just a little. I know it's a little bit of harder thing because this is coming from a colonial perspective, but it doesn't matter, it's straight up science. So when I think about migration, I just want to be sure that everyone is aware that we all evolved simultaneously. So no matter the color of your skin or anything, they say we all come from Africa, but I think Andrew would argue with me about that, saying that it's possible that we could have came straight from the Americas, which would make more sense to me in my heart. But we don't know, because the Amazon is a really difficult area to excavate for archaeologists in general, because there's so much biomass and there's so much there. But there are some evidences of historical migration coming from that area as well. But if you were to look at a textbook, that textbook would tell you that we were all one people that evolved simultaneously. And I think I mention it because I run into it a lot when I'm educating, or just even in conversation with folks, is some people think that one person is more evolved than another person, and it's not the case. We all evolved alongside our land, which I think is really important. Now, I want us to, because we are half hour in, I just want to make sure that we are going to go into what happened to our country. You know, what happened. So
Mhm. Yeah.
one little cute note that I
Go.
found before you get going again.
Yeah,
Um,
go.
one little thing that I found was, I was working in Northern community, and one person told me that, when Canada was named, you know what that word means? And I'm like, yeah, it means the village, because there was this commercial on when I was a kid that was, one of the colonizers came and asked and mistook the word Kanata for Canada, but he was talking about the place where everybody lives. But then I got another translation from another person who said, "Oh no, the word is Konanda. That's how we say the word Canada. And if you asked us, what do you call this place? We call it nothing. Konanda. We call it nothing." So I think it was a funny thing that caught me off guard many years ago, when I was like, oh, that's interesting, because what do we call it? Well, we don't call it anything, the whole place. Anyway, so I just wanted to throw that in there. But what did we lose, Andrew?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think oftentimes it's framed as what Indigenous people have lost. But I remember years and years ago, maybe 15 years ago, Murray Sinclair was speaking at Western University, and he said, "It's not so." I'll never forget this, because it's this. I mean, I didn't know nothing then. I was just, knee high to a grasshopper, I guess. But he said, it's not so much what we lost. We lost a lot as Indigenous people because of the genocides that took place, because of the lies that were told afterwards. But everybody lost because of what we lost. And what the people responsible for this took away from everybody is well, I'll just add one piece to this, and that's about the migration of the oak. So I spent a lot of my life in southwestern Ontario and never really paid much attention to the trees until I started to hear them speaking. And the oak tree, the oak savanna of the Carolinian forest, it's hard to imagine for the colonized mind that we are actually designing the habitat 150 years into the future. And so that as our civilizations expanded, as the climate increased in temperature in tandem with that expansion, because if you read that article, that first article I posted, at the time of contact, we were growing around 56 million hectares of land. Okay. We were cultivating 56 million hectares of land. That land over the course of 1500 to 1600 went fallow. Okay. So it turned into trees and forest where there was none before, or at least not for 100 generations. And over the course of that 5 generations, all of a sudden you get just an explosion of flora and fauna where there were none before, because there was nobody to maintain it. And it's not just that there was nobody to maintain it. We didn't need to maintain it anymore because 90% of our communities were gone. Now, I just want you to imagine for a second your own family, all the members of your family. Let's say you can think of 10 people. Now imagine 9 of them gone tomorrow. Let's say you have a family of 100. Imagine 90 of them gone tomorrow. This was the emotional toll that resulted from this genocide was extraordinary. But worse was this idea when the Europeans eventually came back, when they knew that the disease was not going to affect their families. They said, oh, this is a blank landscape. Yet they were arriving in certain places to a virtual paradise. And one of those paradises was the Carolinian forest, the food forest. The bones of the people that are recovered from the Carolinian zone are the healthiest bones ever to be found on this planet. The people who lived there, this takes a long time to explain, but I'll try to do something very quickly, in that the pockets of oak trees that are found throughout southwestern Ontario and further north, and there's even oak here in Bawating, because there's a pocket of Carolinian the particular zone that the Carolinian forest thrives in. A squirrel did not, scamper 500 miles north and plant these oak trees. We can actually trace the DNA of the oak and find that, in fact, they were planted by they must have been planted by the people based on their isolation. And so let's take this to the next level. We were designing the entire oak savanna forest, which includes 65 species of trees and, around 2,200 different varieties of plant and medicines. And, just a plethora of other, it was one of the richest habitats in North America, and still is, if you can find any remaining. There's a bit remaining in the Carolinas, but see, people tend to talk about this. Actually, there's a book I have, this over there, I'm not going to grab it, but Trees of the Carolinian Forest. People talk about it as if this just magically appeared as the climate increased in temperature, when in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. Okay? Our peoples, our civilizations were planning through diplomacy, through training of our young, through taking extraordinary measures, 150 years at least into the future, to say we are going to create a new habitat here and ensure that these are the people who are going to be responsible for it. And responsible they were. The way that we grew this habitat was using things like controlled burns. And so on some of the most ancient oak trees that are remaining, and I visited a few of them, there's only about 100, you'll find on their northwest edge a burn scar, like a giant burn scar at its base. And that was characteristic of the controlled burns that were done during the storm winds that came in the spring, and those thunderbirds that you went and gave thanks to, that we are called to give thanks to because of what they teach us, that come from the Northwest. I know I'm going deep into this, and I'm going to stop now because there's just so much there. Like, there's so much to discuss. There's so much to learn about how we maintained, not roaming around forest looking for the next deer to spear. We were literally designing very coordinated, strategic, and deliberately entire habitats.
Yeah, and I'd say that's similar to many cultures of that time, that time in prehistory, is that many cultures did that same thing. A lot of cultivation of the plants and animals too. Like we evolved alongside them. So the simultaneousness um, nature of our growth is evident when you look at the records. Now, I know we could go into all the topics really great, and now why? Maybe I won't ask you the question. I'll say, if anybody's familiar with Bishop Grandin in, I think he came from Manitoba. He was a bishop in Manitoba. And Bishop Grandin said that the point for residential schools was to breed the Indian out of the child so that nothing is left but their blood. And that's a really, really sad thing. And there's a whole highway in Winnipeg named Bishop Grandin, and it's a little bit of a bone to pick with Winnipeg in general, because many people and many children and many generations and many teachings went missing due to that idea. And it was an overarching idea that overcrowded all of the cultures in Canada. So, Andrew, what what happened? Why that need for re-education of the children when we talk about all these wonderful, beautiful traditions of the heart and things that we're trying to rediscover now and things that we're trying to recover our own trauma with? Why did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And why are there so many children still missing, like 215 in Kamloops? Kamloops? Yeah,
Yeah.
and like in all the other residential schools, like I think Ontario, the premier is going to put $10 million toward looking for the rest of these bodies, but it's because we know they're there. So
Mm-hmm.
please, if you can give us
Yeah.
an insight on that.
Well, it may be of benefit just to write something down here to give a visual. Let me just see if I can do this really quickly. So this is definitely a topic that in my early learning I never really wanted to approach because of how emotionally fueled it is. Um, when we talk about migrations, it's a good segue to getting into the education of Indigenous peoples that the federal government has taken responsibility for and has failed in miserably over the past 150 years. And we see that in our communities everywhere. Many people probably don't realize that the government funded Indigenous children on reserve about 35% less than all other children in any other school in any province over the course of the last 30 years, which has its own sets of consequences. Which I mean, the most easy of which is described is that we have a very uneducated in terms of the colonial education population amongst our communities. There's a lack of trust. There's a lot of challenges there. But in terms of like what happened, well, I'm gonna draw something out for you. So here's a little timeline. Oh, never mind. My Apple Pen, I think, is out of battery. I think I can get 30 minutes out of it in 15 seconds if I just plug it in. What we're going to do is let's start at 1867 when Canada is confederated as a country. Now, of course, there's a lot to that story in itself because 1867 is 260 years after, or sorry, 150 years after, 260 years after contact, right? I mean, it's a long time after. There's a lot that went on, right? That most people never even learn about anything within that sphere of knowledge. because Canada becomes a country and that's when history begins. But, keep in mind that we were designing our landscape for 1,000 generations prior to that. So that's, that's what was educated out of us, right? That's what needed to be educated out of us, our responsibilities to the land. Now, after 1867, we get to 1876. That's when the first residential school was opened officially. Now, in order to build those residential schools, I just challenge you to Google any residential school and you'll see how they're built with bricks. Now, somebody built those schools. Somebody designed them. Who are those people? That's a question that I've had for a long time. Who are the bricklayers? And did they know what they were building? Perhaps not, but what we do know is that entire forests were leveled in order to build these schools. So here they're taking, not only are they taking away our homelands, they're building us these castles in which extraordinary abuse happened. In fact, I had a conversation this morning with a friend of mine because I probably many Indigenous people have, but I've been bombarded with messages of support, and it's not that I'm not, empathetic for what has transpired over the last 3 weeks. Of course I am, but this is not the first time that a mass grave has been found of children's bodies outside of a residential school, and it won't be the last. And if you've paid attention to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, of which there are 7 volumes and 7,000 children or adults, elders who give testimony of their experience in residential schools, just read some of those testimonies. It's horrifying, right? I'm not going to share what was shared with me this morning, but what you see in the media, what most people see in the media, is not even the tip of the iceberg in terms of what happened. And so if we start at 1876, and this isn't going to work, and I'm not sure why, but that's okay. But if we start at 1876 and we go to 1996, right, which is when the last residential school is closed, that's 120 years. Okay? That's 7 generations of our people who were taken from their families, brought by the RCMP, which was formed in part for this purpose, to these places. There's, I believe 130 residential schools across Canada. Over the course of 120 years, they educated us. Around 60,000 children, perhaps 80,000, and perhaps more, because the record keeping was sparse at the time, and much of those records have been burned by the churches who were ultimately responsible. Never made it home. So when, and this is not private knowledge, this is public knowledge, right? So it does hurt, of course, when 215 children's bodies are discovered, right? But that's the very tip of the iceberg in terms of what's out there. And I mean, what I want to talk about in terms of what happened is not so much about the abuses, the children being kicked in the head and decapitated and sexually assaulted in the most horrific ways that anyone can imagine. And if you feel something when I'm saying this, please breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, and recognize that, we are dealing with this trauma every single day. And when I learned of this when I was 22, because like many, I didn't learn about this crime against humanity, these crimes against humanity in which only, I believe, 30 people have been convicted. in the past 120 years, 150 years, I decided to take action, and I decided to learn everything I can about my own culture. And there's a long ways to go in that. So I'm saying things that are triggering, I realize, and I apologize for those who may be feeling something, but this is the truth. This is our reality that we live with every single day. And I would say, as a segue, to move from this space to a more joyous space, that this is part of the reason why I chose to be part of this particular community, right? And seeing firsthand and being a part of, the tragedy that is the result of 7 generations, right? Imagine your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, your great great grandparents, your great 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 grandparents, and so many greats all were taken away and brought to a school and came home and could no longer speak their language. What is lost? I mean, you can't transmit that ethnobotanical knowledge. So any Indigenous person today who is actually teaching these things or pursuing these things, do not take for granted how they came into that knowledge. It is not, it is our inherent right, but it is not a given that you will be given these teachings. In fact, as one of the teachers that I work with recently said, only about 1% of our people still know our teachings, our knowledge, and practice our way of life. So this was a horrific time, and the impacts of it will be felt for at least 100 years into the future, hopefully less, but we're not just going to get over it. And nobody would, like, nobody can. You can't. It's embedded in your bones.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm gonna just make a note of that, because it is embedded in our bones, and the intergenerational trauma is there, and you can't just forget about it. I had a friend of mine, and she's Métis, and she was at work in a hospital, and one of the nurses heard about the bodies being found, the 215 bodies being found. And she was so upset. She called me crying, and she's like, they said, why don't they just get over it? And it was just like that. It didn't crush me, because that's not new for me to hear. Like, many people say many, many things. I think it's because it's hard to face those truths. Like, why don't you just get over it? Like that line. And it's 7 generations where it was pounded into you, and where it was not okay to, like, it wasn't okay to walk downtown Kenora, or to go into a pub. Like, you wouldn't be allowed to do that, because there was a sign on the door that said no Indians allowed. So what do you think my family did? Well, my family pretended to be white people, and they were obviously not white people. But how else do you get into the economic system? When you're in the early, later 1950s, 60s, when these shifts had not happened yet, and where Indigenous people, I don't know the year that Indigenous people were considered people according to the government, but I think they were disenfranchised and then enfranchised. It wasn't that long ago. Like, it was within the last 100 years. So there is so much, like, and we are inherently political people, because of the natures that Andrew's talking about, is that we need to stand for what we know is good and what is right. And thank you so much for mentioning everything so gently, because I'm not as gentle as you. I have a little bit of deep fire inside of me, and you speak so kindly. And I know that one of the last things that I was asking you about was this idea of the advanced knowledge of consciousness. And when we're thinking about the Psychedelic Association, I think it's very pertinent that we talk about grounding in teachings and this kind of awakening event for others to heal with psychedelics. Like, what is your thoughts on that?
Um, in all of 3 minutes, I get to
In
talk about.
3 minutes, man.
Okay, so to those who are here, those who will listen to this, thank you for being here. Part of our teachings is to be kind, is to be gentle, caring, and loving until our way of life is under threat, until our elders and our women and our children are under threat. So, the immediate threat of that, it could be argued whether it's past or not. But I know that there are leaders across this country and around the world, Indigenous peoples, and I just need to remind everyone that you are Indigenous too, that the trauma of your colonization rests inside your body as well, that whether you remember your Indigenous language or not, you too were colonized at some point. And so for us, the reason why sometimes we are angry and why we fight is because we don't forget, we remember. We are in a state of remembering the teachings of our ancestors, and we are still in the places that we had an inherent right to take care of, right? So that's part of grounding that consciousness, is that I'm not saying anyone needs to go back anywhere or that we can somehow go back in time. We cannot. We can only continue to project our wisdom forward. And part of that wisdom is grounding practice, right? So for us, it's putting down tobacco. For you, it may be singing a song, the song of your heart. There's a way of being on this planet that I do teach about. And if I can just share one more slide here before we send everybody off. In terms of consciousness, I tend to use this slide just to kind of discuss the foundations. This is the very tip of the iceberg. And this is a sphere. It's hard to draw a sphere on 2D image, but essentially our way of life and this way of life, what we were taught when we are birthed through the sacred waters of our mothers, is that love. We're surrounded by love, Zagduin. And from there we learn these ways of being. These aren't like, oh, be respectful, that's how you're supposed to be. These are not punitive. These are practices on the land with all beings, not just your own family, but every single person. So I'd be remiss, if I treated people disrespectfully, but being a brown young man and with a long braid, I often am faced with racism. I didn't know what it was before. I just thought, sorry for swearing, but I'm going to. I just thought like bullshit always happened to me. Like I just thought it was just my life. But then now that I'm an adult and I realize what structural racism is and all these different kinds of racist ideations that occur sometimes unconsciously in the mind and the heart, which I have as well. And I admit that because I have to take responsibility for my own. I can't change yours. You can't change mine. I can only take responsibility for my own. But if I am going to follow the wisdom of my ancestors, then I have to practice loving all. As hard as that is in some instances, and I don't do it perfectly all the time. But love, respect, honesty. Honesty is not about the way you speak again. It's about following the intuition of your heart, that within each of us, the creation, that most beautiful one gave us a responsibility on this planet at this time. And if we listen closely enough, we'll find out what that is. I think I know what mine is, right? Now, I'm not going to go into each because you can read, but we also honor the spring. We're coming up to the summer solstice. Please, please go out, make an offering. Honor the wisdom of the 1,000 generations that came before you, that always made sure to honor when that earth shifts and makes that shift around our grandfather, the sun. We follow our moon cycles, and we're heading towards, here in the land where I am, the strawberry moon. So of course I've been monitoring on my walks where are those strawberry flowers, those little white flowers, because I'm going to return to those places. I've already put tobacco in them to say thank you to that beautiful being, right, that Anishinaabe put to his lip for the very first time. And in the beginning of creation, in the beginning when he was naming all the beings, and tasted for the first time as a human the sweet juice of the strawberry. You know, this is what we are. We are the earth. And if you don't believe that, then just try to go without food or water for days like we do, to connect deeper with our mother through fasting. But honor the solstices and the equinox. Recognize that there is a science to our practice as Indigenous people. There's so much, guys. It's hard to summarize in a short amount of time, but essentially, if you're after the kings and the queens of our forests, right? The ones that Babylon, that they don't like them, right? There's a song by Richie Spice, but then start with the subtle ones. Start with the cedar, right? Go give thanks to the cedar. Go give thanks to the maple. Go give thanks to the birch and the mighty oak. Learn how to process them before you reach out for the ones that can change you, because those are the ones that will change you completely. You might have an experience with a psychedelic medicine, as probably many have, as I have, but that cannot exist in the heart fully until one practices with all the other ones that are there, reaching out and saying, my brother, my sister, my auntie, my uncle, I'm here for you. I've always been here for you. That's the wisdom of our earth, and it's always there. And Jazmin, maybe I can share a song just to close us when it's time.
Yeah, you know what, Andrew? You're so beautiful. Everything about what you say, it's so gentle and sweet. And I love that you say that we want to, dine with your plants. And then you'll see the effects of the psychedelics. That's always my sayings. Then you'll really see what's going on. So please, Andrew, share with us your beautiful song, and then we will sign off.
So, miigwech, kinawaya, thank you. I appreciate your time today, that you would spend it with Jazmin and I in this space. I'm honored that I would be asked to share in this environment, and so this song is about that moment that Anishinaabe, that's the first being, right, the one that transitioned from spirit to human, so that the great spirit could come to know itself as the most beautiful being in the whole universe, and this one place, right, this Ishkakamakwe, our mother, the earth. And when I was thinking about that part of our creation story, I couldn't get it out of my head. It was so beautiful, brought tears to my eyes. And the more I thought about it, eventually this song emerged, and it's a simple song. So I'm going to sing that. I don't have my drum handy, but I'm just going to sing it a cappella for you. And the words are, O Daemon Manido, O Daemon to the spirit of the strawberry, O Daemon Manido. Wisinen, O Daemon Manido, to the spirit of the strawberry, Wisinen, I'm going to eat you. And it's literally that simple. So here it goes. Oh, de min manido. Oh, de min manido. Oh, de min manido. Oh, de min manido. Hey, hey. We sinin ho de min manido. 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 Hey, hey. Nikanagana to all my relations. Miigwech, thank you.
Miigwech, thank you so much, Andrew. And thanks everyone for joining us and listening and lending us your hearts and your ears.